These are the official answers with explanation to your quiz in identifying activities related to statement of cash flow. What are the activities again related to our cash flow? We have operating, investing, and financing activities. So when we say operating, these are the revenue generating activities in the entity. So all transactions wherein the company provides goods or renders service. And then, asa ganini nato makit-an sa ato ang statement of comprehensive income kay naaman nga atong sales or service revenue as well as the expenses related to those items. And then, we also consider our current assets and liabilities in our statement of financial possession. Then, we have our investing activities. So, those activities nga related sa pagbaligya o pagpalit nato og long-term assets and other investments. So, since long-term assets man, asa ni nato makita class sa ato ang non-current asset portion of our statement of financial possession. And then for our financing activities, we have those activities related sa acquisition of funding for the use of the entity, no? So, asa ganini nato makita class, ato ang non-current liabilities and owner's equity section of the statement of financial possession. So, kanilang siya class, no? Maulang ni ato ang timan-an. If naatay problem, especially if ipa-identify ang transaction, magbuhat lang siguro ta og journal entry at the back of our mind, and then we consider if kani siya nga entry ni-touch ba siya og cash nga account, and then if ni-touch gani, unsa ang partner sa cash nga account? Is it a current asset? Is it accounts receivable? Is it accounts payable? So if ma-determine gani nato unsang iyahang paris nga account class, and then kahibaw ta unsay classification sa account, is it a current asset, a current liability, a non-current asset, a non-current liability, or is it under our owner's equity, makuha dayon nato ug asa gyud padung ang activity, unsay iyahang classification. Is it operating? Is it investing? Or is it a financing activity? So let's start with purchase of goods on account. Our entry for this is debit purchase, credit, accounts payable. So kani siya nga transaction class, naatay nakita nga cash ani sa ato ang entry, di ba wala no? So this is a non-cash transaction. Next, we have cash collection from customers. So our entry would be a debit to cash, credit to our service revenue or sales. So unsa may classification aning revenue or sales? So it is a revenue generating transaction of the company which we can find in our statement of comprehensive income under the sales or service revenue portion. So the activity is operating. Next, we have our cash sale of company long-term assets. Our entry would be a debit to cash and then a credit to our long-term assets. So asa ni ang long-term assets class? It is in our property, plant, and equipment under the non-current asset portion of our statement of financial possession. So this is an investing activity. Next, we have payment of income tax. Our entry would be debit income tax expense, credit cash. Where can we find this? In our statement of comprehensive income expense portion. And the activity would be operating. Next, we have purchase of building. So we debit building, we credit cash. So what is the classification of a building, it is a property, plant, and equipment under our non-current asset as FP. So the activity is investing. Next, we have the payment of accounts payable. So our entry would be debit accounts payable, credit cash. So asa ni nato makita si accounts payable in our current liability portion of the SFP. So the activity is operating. Next, we have the proceeds from the sale of land. So our entry would be debit cash, credit land. Where can we find this? In our non-current asset portion of the SFP. So the activity is investing. Next, we have the payment of our bank loan. Entry would be debit loan payable, credit cash. So where can we find this? In our non-current liability SFP portion. So the activity is financing. Next, we have our depreciation expense. So when we recognize depreciation, our entry would be debit to depreciation expense and then credit accumulated depreciation. Since this does not affect our cash account, this is a non-cash transaction. Next, we have the collection of our accounts receivable. Our entry would be debit to cash and then credit accounts receivable. Where can we find this? In our current asset SFP. And the activity is operating. Next, we have the provision for our uncollectible accounts. Our entry would be debit to bad debts expense and then credit to our allowance for doubtful accounts. So in this entry, we do not recognize any cash. So this is a non-cash transaction. Next, we have payment of rent. Our entry would be debit to rent expense, credit cash. So where can we find this? In our SCI expense portion. So the activity is operating. Next, we have our payment of utilities. So our entry would be debit utilities expense, credit cash. So where can we find this? In our statement of comprehensive income, still in the expense portion. So this is an operating activity. Next, we have our gain on sale of equipment. The entry would be a debit to cash, debit accumulated depreciation, credit gain on sale, and then credit equipment. If we are only asked about the gain on sale, this is a non-cash transaction. But if you can see in the entry, there is a cash account. So the cash here class refers to the full proceeds of the sale of equipment. The cash here is considered under our investing activity because this is related to a non-current asset. So class, ayaw lang mo kalibog, no? If gain on sale lang ang question, yun, nothing else. That is a non-cash transaction. But if you are told that this is for cash proceeds in the sale of an equipment, the cash proceeds there, we have to refer that to our investing activity. Kaya ang gibaligya nato ana is the equipment, which is a non-current asset. Then also, if you notice in our indirect method of SCF, the gain on sale is deducted from the net income. So, gideduct lang na siya class, kay ang cash proceeds man ana sa pagbaligya sa equipment is already considered in the investing activity. Okay? Klaro ra? Next, we have additional investment of the owner. So our entry would be a debit to cash, credit, owner's capital. So where can we find this? Of course, in our owner's equity. So this is a financing activity. Next, we have sale of goods on accounts. Our entry would be debit accounts receivable and then credit sales. Since this transaction does not involve the cash account, this is a non-cash transaction. Next, we have our cash withdrawal of the owner. So our entry would be debit owner's drawing and then credit cash. So where can we find the withdrawal? The drawing, it is in our owner's equity. It is a component in our owner's equity. And the activity is financing. Next, we have payment of employees' salaries. The entry would be debit to salaries expense, credit cash. So this can be found in our statement of comprehensive income expense portion. So this is an operating activity. Next, we have our payment of interest on bank loan. So our entry would be debit interest expense and then credit cash. So where can we find this? In our statement of comprehensive income. So the activity is operating. Next, we have proceeds of bank loan. Our entry would be a debit to cash, credit, loans payable. So where can we find this? In our non-current liability, SFP. So the activity is financing. So class, you just need to know what account is affected with your cash transaction. Does it affect your current asset, your current liability, your non-current asset, non-current liability, or owner's equity accounts? And then from there, you can then proceed in identifying the related activity to your cash flow. So is it operating? Is it investing? Is it financing? So if we can master this class, we can easily create our statement of cash flow.